Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 1, Episode 13. There's 3 stories in this episode. They're called Night of the Meek, But Can She Type, and The Star. This is also a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking this show on this particular week. So yeah, this is a Christmas episode, which is kind of wild that we just happened to land on this right around Christmas. And I know it's after Christmas now, but like it's close. Given that, you know, like it's completely random when this was picked to be started when it was. So the fact that we're hitting the Christmas episode within a week of Christmas happening is kind of wild to me. So the first story in this episode, which I quite enjoyed, is a remake of an episode in the original show. And I have to admit, I didn't realize it was a remake of an original episode until very late on in the story, where it kind of like finally sparked my memory. Mainly because, well, the premise is definitely overall the same kind of idea. It certainly starts in a different way and it ends... This might be blasphemy, but I think I prefer this version based on what I remember, because admittedly, I think it was a season 1 of the original show episode where a man finds a magic bag that can bring out any item that's asked or thought of inside it. So it's like basically Santa's sack, and it starts giving out presents to people. There's a lot of things I like about this that I don't think were in the original, but again, my memory is very hazy. I think the other big thing I like about this episode is that the Scrooge type character who runs the department store where the main character works as Santa Claus is played by William Atherton, aka Dickless from Ghostbusters, aka the reporter guy from Die Hard. He's perfect for this type of role. He plays the asshole so well. But of course, by the end of the story, he's going to have his heart warmed by the Christmas magic of whatever. But I think that the big thing that I liked here, and some of this was in the original, this idea that it's about giving presents to those less fortunate, that, you know, they're in a sort of poorer neighborhood, and this is a time when a lot of them aren't happy because they don't get a happy Christmas like a lot of other people do. They don't have all the presents. Some of them are homeless, that kind of thing. But I liked a couple things about this. One, I like the real sense of community in this one by the time he actually has the magic bag. And it's not a bag that he finds either. It's a bag that... It's just a bin bag. It's just a trash bag that he was taking outside with the trash. But once he has it, and like the villain of the story, as it were, and eventually the police come and find him, like he's throwing a party in the apartment building and the entire neighborhood's like come to see him and hang out and get presents from the bag, and it's a very nice, well-spirited story that is a really feel-good story, with the one exception being the villain, the antagonist of Mr. Peck from Ghostbusters. William Atherton's character like comes in, sees this happening, and instead of having his heart warmed, assumes that all of the items are stolen from his store, calls the police, and there's a little bit of a worry that maybe, because he can't prove that he bought all these things, that he's going to be taken away to the police. Even though the police guys both seem to be quite heartwarmed by everything they're seeing and seeing this neighborhood come so alive and be full of lights and all that. As soon as it's becoming an issue, what comes out of the bag but all the receipts for all the items. So I like that. But I particularly liked the introduction to the main character, because he's introduced in a bar, right? And he's late for work, he's drinking, and he's run out of money, and he's begging for more booze, and the bartender says, "No, you can't have any, I'm sorry." And the main character's never an asshole about it. He never, like, you know, he kind of accepts it. But there's a moment here where a couple of kids outside are looking in through the window because they see someone dressed as Santa Claus. And Santa says, and I say Santa, Mr. Corwin is his name. He says, "Oh, like Christmas isn't really Christmas for those kids. They're poor. They're not going to get anything. It's just another day of survival." And the guy sitting next to him at the bar says, "Well, hey, you're dressed as Santa. Why don't you go out there and just give them a couple of minutes to cheer them up?" And he says, "Well, that's a nice idea, but like all I am is a cruel joke, because anything they ask for, I can't give them. So it kind of implies that the reason why this character's so sad is that he wants to give other people joy and happiness, but he doesn't feel like he can, and that's actually why he's depressed and drinking. But when he gets up to leave, the bartender notices that there's some money sticking out of his pocket, and it's kind of the first sign that the magic of like things happening or being created isn't really the bag itself, it's more a power that he's getting because he wants to give people joy. So the heartwarming part here, though, is that the bartender says, "Oh, will I get you another drink then?" And he says, "No, actually, thanks very much, but I don't think I will." And when the bartender looks over a minute later, he sees him outside giving this money that he found in his pocket to the two kids. His last, $10, $20, whatever it is, he's giving it to the two kids. And it's kind of this setup that he's already this nice person, that he's already wanting to spread a little bit of joy if he can. And then when it turns into the bag that just produces anything, anything the person asks for, which is super specific in some case. Someone asked for new glasses, which I assume are prescription, and sure enough, out comes a pair of glasses. Out comes the left-handed batting catcher's mitt or whatever, whatever it is. So I really like that setup to the character because it really kind of made him likable and kind of set you up for the tone of the story right away. It was very heartwarming. Plus the ending, if I remember correctly, in the original, the main character wishes that he could do it every year, and then an elf sort of shows up to recruit him as the new Santa Claus. Here, he just kind of magically becomes the real Santa Claus, where after he says he wishes he could do it every year, after he's warmed the heart of the villain, which I'll get to that scene because that's also very good, he goes back into the house, and he basically finds that his beard is now attached and he can't pull it off, and the suit's changed, it's a bit more authentic, a bit more high quality, and then he realizes what he's become, and he turns into like magic dust and goes up the chimney. And the final moment of the episode is actually the villain, who's now kind of like accepted the miracle of Christmas, looks up when he hears sleigh bells, and it's clearly implied that that our main character has indeed become the new Santa Claus, long before Tim Allen replaced him, I guess. But I really liked the vibe of this episode more so than the original. And admittedly, I think it's a bias. I don't think it's necessarily because the quality's necessarily better, although I do think William Atherton's a very good Scrooge sort of villain type character. It's more, I think, just the bias of my liking of 80s era stuff. And I think Christmas in the 80s, for some reason, just like speaks to me on a level that Christmas in the end of the 50s, start of the 60s just wouldn't. There's something about it that just clicks. And it's not like I was around in the 80s. I mean, technically I was born right at the very end, right? But by the time I turned 1, I was already in the 90s. So it's not like I remember this period. But for some reason, because so many like movies and shows that I love are from the 80s, there's just something about this that just feels more inherently Christmassy to me. But I do think it's a very sweet story. I think it got well cast, both for the hero role and the villain. And the villain's whole thing is that, obviously when he's mean to some employees, of course, tells one of them to work on Christmas. When he finds the main character giving out all the presents, he assumes they're stolen, he calls the police. A great little moment here, actually, is when he demands a phone so he can call the police. A woman at the party hands like a mobile phone, or a cell phone for the Americans, but it's like the big 80s one, the big white brick phones. And he has this moment where he takes it out of her hand and then looks at it and realizes that this was her present from the bag, and just looks annoyed that he's handling stolen property. I thought that was a really inspired little moment. But yeah, basically, after everyone else has left and he's sitting out on the steps, just sort of like, how did you do this? How did you pull this off? And Carwin sits down next to him and just pulls out the fur coat that his wife wanted for Christmas, that the Atherton's character's wife wanted for Christmas. And he's like, this is the coat my wife wanted. But some idiot at the store sold it when it was supposed to be for me. And then he pulls out a baseball that's signed by all the Yankees from whatever year. And William Atherton, that's when he finally smiles and just accepts the magic of what this is and feels happy that he's been given the perfect gift. And that's kind of how the villain's heart is finally melted. Something that John McClane in Holly McLean or Gennaro, depending on the day, couldn't do in Die Hard. Something that Peter Venkman and Egon Spengler and Winston and Ray couldn't do in Ghostbusters. I'm trying to remember all the names of the Ghostbusters. Well, I remember the names easily enough, but trying to remember all their full names, I clearly just gave up halfway through. Anyway, his heart was melted. It's a sweet story. It is a redo of a classic Twilight Zone episode, but I do think it's a really solid version of it, and I might even like it a little bit more, if I'm honest. I think it appeals to me more at the very least. But there's a couple of interesting additions. I think the scene with the money in the bar and him being nice to those kids, I think that is new, or at the very least, it's a very different version to the opening, at least. And I think Atherton makes her for a really good Scrooge type villain. So really like the first story. I do think it's the standout of the three between them. Actually, interesting from a structure point of view. And normally when we get three stories on the show so far, it's always been a longer story, a tiny story in the middle, and then a longer story again. So typically they end up being about 20 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes. And that's mostly been the way. This one's a little bit more closer to even between them, where this one was about 20. I think the next one is like something like maybe 15-ish, maybe 13-ish. And then whatever's left is the last one. So I think the last two stories are about the same length, which was actually kind of refreshing from a pacing perspective. It felt like they were both just kind of right in that sense. But the second story is good. It's quirky. It's a little bit weird. It's set at Christmas, although the fact that it's Christmas isn't really that important, other than the fact that her boss asking the main character to work late when she's got plans and it's basically Christmas tomorrow is a little bit, just to sort of establish that she's mistreated, that her boss doesn't appreciate her, and whatnot. But the story is about a secretary who basically goes to an alternate reality via a photocopier. See, that sounds ridiculous when I say that out loud. But yes, there's a magic photocopier in the photocopy room. She, without realizing it, might I add, goes to an alternate dimension. And in this alternate dimension, secretaries are greatly respected. And they're like seen as like this ideal profession. Everyone is in awe of them. And like, because she goes to a Christmas party, she's maybe meeting a guy that she's been dating just briefly. And she goes to this party expecting to meet him, but can't find him. And when she mentions just casually that she's a secretary, everyone at the party stops talking and looks at her. And at first I thought, oh wait, are they all like disgusted by her because she's like not like rich like the rest of these people or something? And then it turns out, like, oh my god, you're a secretary at my party. And then like various characters are like in awe. There's like a fashion model at one point is like, oh, I wish I could be a secretary. Guys start hitting on her. In fact, another notable guest star in this episode, the main guy that hits on her at the party is none other than William Riker himself. Jonathan Frakes, just a couple years before Star Trek The Next Generation. Notably has a beard before Next Gen. That's interesting to me. That's interesting because, like, because he starts Next Gen with the clean shaven and then gets the beard in season 2, I guess I assumed that, like, I don't know, the fact that he has a beard relatively pretty soon before Next Gen started makes me think that they asked him to shave it, and then he got his way and was able to grow it back for season 2. That's what it feels like, because he had the beard beforehand. And he's had the beard ever since. Like, whenever you see Jonathan Frakes in anything after Next Generation, he's got the beard. I think he likes having the beard. And he begrudgingly shaved it for season 1 of TNG. That is my guess, based on this new evidence that has come to light. Damn it. Anyway, so yeah, and she's offered a job by some bigwig who's like, oh, I know secretaries are in high demand, and I'm sure the company you're with treats you like a princess, but if you're ever interested in another job, and this guy gives her a business card, and she's kind of like, wait, what? All right. But she realizes at the end of the party that she has left her keys back at the office, so she goes back and goes back to the photocopier and transports herself back to her own reality without realizing it. So she went to an alternate dimension and came back and never realized. And it's not until that her date like leaves a message saying, "Where were you at the party last night? I was waiting for you all night. You weren't there." The fact that like the last photocopy she thought she did for her boss wasn't done, and then she kind of puts two and two together, and she's like, "Wait a minute." She also phones the number on the business card, and it doesn't exist, basically. So she's like, "Oh, the photocopier." And so she actually goes to the photocopier and tells her like co-worker, like, if I don't come back, then I was making a copy. And she goes to the photocopier, and there's guys trying to move it, and it looks a little bit different than the other ones. And she's like, "No, I need to use this one." And she basically fights them off so she can use this photocopier before it goes. Interestingly, it turns on despite the fact that they were moving it. You'd think they would unplug it. Then again, it is a magic photocopier that sends people to alternate realities, so maybe it's not exactly running on the power grid. But sure enough, she transports to their reality, she phones for this job and gets it, where she's going to be set off to Paris to head up the Paris office of whatever this guy's company is. She's given a limo, she's given a new wardrobe, and it's basically the Christmas gift she got was she got a trip to the Twilight Zone. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's just this like flipping the reality where being the secretary isn't this demeaning job where your boss is like grilling you out for not doing a photocopy right and demanding you work late and calling you good girl for doing a thankless task. You know, he's really condescending, our boss in the real world. And then over here, in this bizarro upside down world where everyone is treating her like a rock star, yeah, it's just this perfect sort of thing. It's kind of a weird like idea for a story, but that kind of made it interesting, honestly. Like any critiques I have are just me looking for just any kind of like greater meaning beyond just, yeah, she's underappreciated and she's been sent to a world where she is like arguably overappreciated. Maybe we all deserve to be overappreciated though. But yeah, I mean, it was a quirky story. Interesting seeing Riker pop up, of course. And I think again the main cast here, I'd argue the two main cast members here are obviously the secretary, and the other character that's the most prominent is by far her boss, who's a dick to her. But he plays being a dick very well. I can't argue with that. I really can't. I mean, if anything, like maybe the only far-fetched thing is that she's even able to figure out it was the photocopier. Because that's a bit of a leap to take in a lot of ways. A quantum leap, you might say, to the other dimension. Anyway, yeah, it's a fun story. It's a fun story. I don't think it has like the feel-good vibes the first story, but it's pretty feel-good anyway, because the character gets like a happy ending of sorts. But it is pure fantasy in that sense. Not that the first one isn't, obviously, because magic presents are coming out of a bag, but... Anyway, the third story is called The Star. And I thought I recognized the main guy in this, but he wasn't who I thought he was, so... Doesn't matter. I think I have seen him and stuff when I looked him up, because I recognized some of the credits, but I thought he was an actor from Reanimator, but he was not. It's Fritz Weaver is the actor in question here, but he plays a priest on a spaceship. It's a spaceship traveling through wherever, and he has a debate with the captain of the... No, he's a doctor. He's the ship's doctor, sorry. And they're basically arguing, or not arguing, but they're having like a friendly debate about this like star chart they're looking at like in front of them on the screen. I don't think it's a window. Maybe it was meant to be a window and they were just looking at this, part of the galaxy or whatever. But they talk about how beautiful it is and how it's like the biggest Christmas tree you've ever seen and all sorts, right? And they mention that it's Christmas, but it doesn't really feel like Christmas because they're just on a spaceship. So yeah, their calendars on their ship say it's Christmas Day, but they're out in the middle of space, so nothing really feels like Christmas. But it's very clear here the Doctor is atheist or agnostic and believes in science, believes that there's no such thing as a creator, and talks about how it's just, it's all random, enough time, infinite space, things are created. And then of course the priest is like, no, there's none of this can be random. There's a design to this. So it just sets up their viewpoints on the world. But the story is really about the fact that they find a planet near this because they talk about how it's like a star went nova a long time ago. It's like an exploded star left all this debris, and that's what looks so pretty. and it destroyed every planet in its path for however many light years or miles or whatever. And there's like a planet just on the rim of this area that they've found, and they've found like a tower that looks kind of Eiffel Tower-ish. Not exactly. I'm just comparing it to that. It's not meant to be the Eiffel Tower. But they've basically found like a vault, like that's several floors deep, that has like basically the history of an alien race inside it, right? There's like an entire like floor with just crates of art, with the paintings, sculptures. There's like a floor with like records of their history. There's I mean, some of this is just implied, but the idea being is that a civilization put like a time capsule for anyone else to find. And it becomes clear that the reason why they did this is because they knew that their sun was going to die, that it was going to go nova, and that their entire civilization was going to be wiped out. So they found a way to get to this like sort of planet that was far enough away and stashed a complete history of who they were to try and let people know they existed. Which does beg the question, like, if they could get here, why couldn't they keep going further and just survive? But maybe that's too big of an operation. But yeah, they talk about how wondrous this is, and how it's like, like, is it kind of sad that they all died? And it's like, no, there's no chance they survive because of how big this supernova was. And they go into all this, they talk about it, and it's somewhat interesting, right? And the paintings they look kind of human. Maybe they're kind of blue. I guess the Na'vi are out here in space or something. But the main point of the episode, though, is the final scene, right? Because it's basically just 3 scenes. It's the scene where we set up the characters and debate, like, what their viewpoints are. The scene where we find all this stuff and talk about who these people were. And then the final scene is the priest is very upset because he's realized something based on, he's done some maths and whatnot based on what they've found. And basically, it turns out that this supernova, this sun that died and took all these planets with it, including this civilization that was advanced, a civilization which, I may add, they specifically point out, seems like they had about 1,000 years of pure peace before their death, right? For the last 1,000 years they existed, they had achieved peace where there was no war, and they'd achieved perfect harmony in their own world. So, shame to lose them, basically. They devolved to a higher level of being. And he's upset because he's realizing he traced when the light of this explosion would have hit Earth, right? It would have taken so many light years, and it would have taken so much time. What would it have looked like in the sky? And he's basically realized, with figuring this out, that the explosion of this star, which killed this civilization that seemed to be a peaceful, intelligent civilization, was actually the light in the sky the night that Jesus was born. That the Star of Bethlehem, the brightest star in the sky, was this dying species. It was the death of this civilization that gave this wondrous visual, and he's really depressed about it. Now, I actually thought he was going to go the other direction for a minute. I thought he was going to take this as proof that all of that happened because it happens to sync up and it would have been visible in this part of the planet. Although I feel like it would have been visible probably from anywhere on the planet where it was nighttime, if I'm honest. I would have assumed so anyway. I don't think it would be that different if it was a little bit. But he pinpoints it exactly to Bethlehem. To Jerusalem, I can say that properly. And I was like, okay, this is, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Where are you going with this? And basically, it goes down the path where he's just like, he's struggling to deal with the idea that an entire species, intelligent species that was peaceful, had to die just to create that one moment of beauty on Earth over something that obviously he holds very dear, as the idea of Jesus being born. And he's very conflicted by this because, up until now, he's like, oh, it's God's plan, and, like, he can't be held accountable for sons dying and whatnot. But now he's realizing that the birth of Jesus is directly linked to the death of all these people, and it's something that people talk about with song in their hearts. They talk about the light of Bethlehem, all that. And it's actually the atheist character who comes in and says, well, maybe this will make you feel better because we found this poem, and we've translated it. I don't even know if he says they translated it. Like, I'm assuming they're translating things because why would it be in English? But that's not dwell on the details that may get in the way of things. And he basically just reads this little. It's basically just like a goodbye note, if anything, where it just says, "Hey, we had our time. We go out with peace and with grace. We're thankful for the time we had." And it doesn't sound like it's scared or resentful. It sounds like they accepted whatever their fate was, and that they were happy to do it. And that maybe their existence will help inspire something. It kind of leaves off in this note that while you can still feel conflicted about it, that maybe their time was up and the light in the sky was like their inspiration to like a new world, a new species that was still growing up and isn't quite there yet or something. So it leaves on kind of that note to mull over and think about. I don't know, it'd have been nice if they still got to live, if they were nice, friendly and peaceful and all that, but yeah, this one I think could have been fleshed out a lot more. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think this making a religious person question like it's because there's so many bad things happen on Earth, and it's like, oh, it's God works in mysterious ways, or it's his plan, or blah 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 blah. That's the idea that this is so big cosmically, and in making this guy question his faith and question like the will of God and all that. Like, I think there's something interesting here to maybe explore, but I think that the idea is too big for such a short segment, right? This 10-minute segment or whatever it is at the end of this episode, I don't think can really like explore this to the depth that it probably deserves to be explored, to flesh it out and really make it feel like we're understanding the characters' viewpoints. Like, yeah, it's easy to say he's religious and the other guy's not, and just sort of have them bounce off of each other, but really sort of get into the meat of it. And I don't know, there's probably more to have done with this. I mean, it was interesting seeing a story set in space, because I don't know if this show's done that yet, the 80s version of Twilight Zone. This might be the first time we've been on a spaceship, now that I'm thinking about it. But lukewarm on this one. It's an interesting idea, the concept. I don't know if I really kind of buy into when the character starts talking about how this is torture on him and whatnot, and like, how can he accept, God's plan if blah blah blah. So, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, overall though, as an episode with all three stories combined, it's a pretty cool little Christmas anthology, I guess. I'd say the first one is the most Christmassy in the way that I would think of Christmassy as far as like a story goes. The last one's obviously taking your religious kind of angle on it. The middle story is kind of weird and quirky and has its own interesting little premise, which beyond just being set around Christmas doesn't actually feel like it has that much to do with Christmas. But regardless, it's still an interesting little trio of stories that I don't think, this was an easy watch, this one. Like, some episodes of this 80s show are very like hit and miss even in themselves, and like last episode was a good example of that, where even though I didn't love it in the end, the first long story was really interesting and there was a lot of interesting ideas that went into it. The one with the woman's soul and the science experiment, right? But then there was a story after that with the devil, which was just kind of a shorty sit through, even though it was a short one. So there's kind of like this ebb and flow to this show, where sometimes you can be hit with two or three easy to watch stories. Sometimes it'll be the worst case scenario is just where they're all bad. And then sometimes there's a bit of, hit and miss, and you get this or that. I would say this is a time where maybe they're not all complete winners, but none of these were hard to watch. And I'm glad the last one was the shortest, for sure. Even though I do think, in theory, a longer version could have maybe done more with the material. So, it's not bad. It's definitely an interesting little Christmas trio of stories. I'll be very curious to see if they do this again, because I don't think, thinking back to the original Twilight Zone, I don't know if there was any other Christmas episodes aside from the one that was remade in this episode. There might have been, but I do not remember them off the top of my head. They're not sticking out in my mind, but I guess we'll find out. So yeah, let me know what you thought of any of these stories in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Of course, you can support all the content and the show over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. and you get bonuses for this channel, but also for Male Fuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. So if you haven't checked that channel out yet, go check that out too. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.